Hello everyone, welcome back. So it's been a while and I've been stuck on some other stuff that has kept me away. So I think for now I'm back and we can continue from where we left off. Okay, so let's get up back to business. So in the last episode we started working on our UI. So I made a detailed video on how I implemented the login UI and also created a fast version for that. So I think from the analytics, looks like we prefer the detailed video more, and I think I might stick to that unless a request I made for the fast version. All right, so that aside, I have a couple of tips to share with us today. So recently we created the socket service for our app, and here is a tool that allows us to test our socket channel. Okay, socket server rather. So I'll put the link in the description below for those of us who wants to still go back to check it out. And basically what you have to do is to enter the socket server URL here and you try to connect. So currently the socket server URL for our implementation is this. So api.dev.com, then port 2053. So when we try to connect to this now, let's see if it connects. So it really won't connect and the response we get will be a timed out. And that's as a result of the connection we have on our Nginx server. So as you can see, connection to HTTPS 203 timed out. Okay. So to fix this, all we need to do is to go back to our server and access the Nginx server block. So that's currently what we have here. Okay, so here is the server block. And on the server block for the socket server, by default, what we used to have is the first part, which is just the proxy pass. However, since this is going to be a socket server, then we need an upgrade. So this other part that is currently commented out is what we need to put in place to make this thing function well as a socket server. So let's quickly uncomment that and reload our server. Right, so I've updated that and reloaded the server. So now if we try to connect to that server now, everything should be okay. Alright, so as you can see, we got connected. So the status is here. And now we can try to listen to an event. So if we remember in our socket service, the event we've made available is the command event, channel rather. Okay, so the command channel. So let's try to listen to that and it has been added. Now if we try to emit on that channel, let's send a message and we emit. So if we go back to this, we will see the message you sent. And this is because from the server, from the socket service we defined in such a way that whatever we emit or send to the server should also be emitted back. So that's what we did and that's why we are getting this back. So that's basically what I want to share, the tip I want to share. So with that done, let's go back to our code and see what we've done so far. Alright, so here is our code. So what I've done is I've gone back to design the remaining parts for the UI. So let me start the server so that we can just walk through that. Alright, so here is what we have. So this is what I've been able to work on. So this is going to be the main UI aside from the login screen. So we can always go back to those by saying /login. So here is the login screen and from there we can access the sign up. Yeah, so that is literally it. So also I've updated the repo with the code for this update. So I'll also put the link in the description below so that we can always check that out. Alright, so all that we need to do now is to integrate this with the API and see that it works. So we're going to be starting with the authentication. So let's navigate back to the login. So the idea actually is by default the the main UI will be the entry point. However, if it tries to check if there is an authenticated user and it couldn't find, then it redirects you to the login screen. Okay, so let's jump on that and start working on that. Alright, so currently this is the entry point. This is the home screen. So what we can do is we can have a different component to undo authentication. So usually these components like this are used to more like undo authenticated related views. So what I'm saying in essence is we are going to create a component. So let's create one. And I'll call this Auth controller. And within this Auth controller, it's still going to be a regular React component. However, it's going to be more like a handler for authenticated routes. Okay, so let me quickly put this into code. So import React from React. Then also we need the use effect. So use effect, then the use state as well. And I think we will need the use context too. Alright. So now let's define the function for the Auth controller. So we have const. So it's going to take in props. Then we have this. Then we are going to export a default Auth controller. Right, so this is the basic structure of our Auth controller. And basically what is going to be within this Auth controller will be routes that requires authentication. Okay, so what we are going to return here would be children. Okay, so let's have that within a div. Right, so this is what we are going to return within our Auth controller. And the way this really works is we try to verify the authentication status of the app. And if it's not authenticated, then we redirect to the login. And if it is, then we can redirect to the children we've extended this Auth controller with. So to make this work, what we can do is to go back to the router. And yeah, so this means the home component requires authentication. So what we can do now is we can wrap this within the Auth controller component. So we can now extend our component like this. So this becomes a component, so props. So there is props. Then we return the Auth controller. So we currently have not imported that, so we'll do that. And this Auth controller can now house the home. And also we spread out the props. We're also going to do the same thing for the Auth controller as well. So what we can do here is that for every component that requires authentication, we can just have the route defined in this manner. So if the app is not authenticated, then whatever you've set up within your Auth controller is used to undo it. And if it is, then everything works fine. Alright, so now before we actually proceed, I would like to share more info here. So now what we currently have will work for the paths / and work for just home. But let's take for instance, we have other components that require Auth. So what we can do in such situation is we can just have the Auth controller out here, and we can have all other components within the Auth controller. So for instance, we have this. So now we can now maintain the usual flow we used to have. So like this, we can now maintain this. So this will also work. So whichever way you want to. So let's actually go ahead with this. So now we've defined this within our Auth controller. Now in our Auth controller, we need to now check if the user or if the app is currently authenticated. So let's define our use effect. So we really don't need any effect here. So let's create a function to check for authentication. So we currently don't have this function. Let's define it. Right. So while we are doing that, let's also have a state to check to be like a loader while we do this checkup, so that we won't be showing what we don't want to show at that point. So let's create a state for that. So let's say checking. So by default, the checking state will be true. Right. So what we can now have here is, while we are checking, we want to return a loader, and as soon as we are done checking, we can now return the shell that requires all we need. So let's do that. So checking. So let's create a component for just loading. So usually when you want to have generic components like this, you can create a separate folder to house components. So let's do that. So from components. So this would be our loader. And yeah, by the way, if you are using Visual Studio Code, there are some snippets you can use to just quickly put things in place. So RFCE will create a functional component for you on the fly. However, you might need to rename it with a capital letter. So that's all we need for this. Now we can come back to include the loader component. Alright, so as you can see, it's imported it automatically. So by merely typing it here, so it's automatically imported it. Alright, so one of the things we need to do is to add a style so that we can maintain our theme. So we can style the default Auth controller view. So currently now, if we don't have any error, let's check. So everything seems to be working. If we go back to the browser, we might not see anything. Okay, let's go back to the home page. So we are not seeing anything, and that's because we currently are on the loader state. So we've not really given it a go ahead to show the children info. Right. So let's quickly give the loader state a theme. So class. So this is the Auth container, and what we can literally just do here is to come down to the styles and give it a background of our primary color. So let's see this. There's nothing still. So let's try and make things work. So width equals to 100%. Then the minimum height equals to 100 pH. So let's see if this works now. Right. So the next thing we want to do is to implement the loader. So let's quickly have a simple CSS to do this. Alright, so class loader. And if we go back to the style, so let's create a style for this. So we can have a width of 50 pixel, height of 50 pixel, a border of 3 pixel, solid, then white. So that will be the color. So that's the border. So this will actually take the whole border. Let's save this and reload. Right, so this is what we have. That's too big actually. So let's change it back to, let's say, 30, 32. All right. So now let's remove some of the border color. So border dash color, border left. So let's make that transparent. That's what we have with that. So let's remove border bottom as well. So border bottom color. Alright. Then let's have the border radius to be 30 pixel as well. Right, so we have ourselves something that looks like a loader. Actually, let's remove the border right. Alright, so I think I'm okay with that. So lastly, let's have an animation for the loader. So let's create a keyframe. So let's say to transform and rotate. I think Z actually. 360 degrees. Right, so now we've defined the rotate keyframe. So let's set that on the animation component here. So it needs the name. So let's have the name. The duration, let's use 500 milliseconds. Timing function, let's use linear. And I think that might work. Okay, let's use infinite as well. So infinite will make it rotate forever. So let's see how this works now. Alright, so that fits what we want our loader to be. So finally, let's centralize that loader so that we have it centered. So to do this, we can just have this loader within a different component, a different div, so that we can just center everything. Okay, so I'll give this div a class of center all. Alright. So let me save this and go into our style to center all. So I will have the width to be 100%. I will have the height to be 100%. Then display flex. Then align items center. Then justify content center. Right, so let's see this. Okay, so it looks like the height is not being maintained. So let's try and make sure. So let's give this a height of 100% and let's see if that actually works. Still not working. Okay. So, well, maybe an assumption we can make for now, so we can literally still fix this later, is to say the minimum height for the center all is, let's say 100 VH. So later on when we need to make adjustments, we will make that. So this is working now. Alright, so this is our loader and that looks okay. So now since we have that, loading while we check if the user is authenticated, we can now move to actually check. So the first part of our check is to see if we have the authentication token stored on our local storage. So we are going to define the token data for that. So let's just say the token data is token name equals to token name. So this is more like just defining something to check. So what I can now say is I can check for token. So const token equals local storage dot get item token name. All right. So the way the response for our token usually comes is it comes with both the token and the refresh token. So when you are saving to the local storage, you have to stringify it and send the string version to the local storage. So also when you are getting the item back, you need to pass it. So for a scenario where we have token, but so let's check if we don't have token first. So if not token, so remember JavaScript seems to be truthy as well. So if the token is null, so it's going to be false. So if not token, then we want to just redirect to the login. So let's have it as props dot push prop dot history rather dot push login. Then at this point we want to return. We don't want to continue with any process. Okay, so if we have it like this, then we should automatically be returned to the login page if we don't have any token stored. So let's check this out. Alright, so push of undefined. Okay, so let's see why we are having this error. Props.history. So it's looking like the router we defined here does not contain this. Okay, so yeah, I think I figured out the reason. So let's resolve this. To resolve this, we can as well have the Auth controller within a route, and the path is going to be all paths. So just a slash. So it assumes all path contains a slash, but not an exact. So it won't be exact. So we want to consider all paths. So then we can now have the components. So we can use components, we can use render. Let's just go with components. I'm not really sure if there's any major difference. So then we can get access to the props because we needed that props at that point there to push. And if you don't want to, you can always use with router to get your information. But let's just go through this process. And now you can have the components here. Then let's close the route. Okay, so this should also still work. So now we have like a path that's more like we'll handle for any request we make. And then within it, we have the path that we undo our exact route we are going to. So that means we need to actually spread this with the props as well. Okay, so let's check it again and see if okay, so we got ourselves to the login now. So let's try and access the main page again. Okay, as you can see, it tried to load, so it tried to check, and as soon as it realized that we don't have the token, it takes us to the login page. So now we can implement the login and register contents. So let me stop here, and in the next episode, we'll just start with implementing the register and the login page.